Whenever you're building something, you always think, oh, I'm going to remember this, but you never do. As soon as you open those up, you just know that it's really hard to figure out what was going on. More time fixing than building a new one.
Do you believe financial models are the number one corporate decision-making tool?
I hope not. I think what I've learned the most...
Valuing a company, where do you typically start?
You look at their assets, comparable companies, then you look at an income approach. In the beginning of my career, I always thought it was the right thing to just make the formula as complex as possible. Now I'm the opposite. I would rather create tons of helper rows or helper cells. It's a bigger measure of somebody's intellect if they can take something really complex and chop it into little parts to make it work. Excel's just such a blank canvas that you can do anything. We're all kind of geeks over here. We all love Excel. We've spent a lot of time.
If you could offer one piece of advice to our audience to be a better financial modeler, what would be your one piece of advice?
Don't fall for the illusion of precision by overthinking.
Welcome to Financial Modeler's Corner, where we discuss the art and science of financial modeling with your host, Paul Barnhurst. Financial Modeler's Corner is sponsored by Financial Modeling Institute.
Welcome to Financial Modeler's Corner. I am your host, Paul Barnhurst, aka the FP&A Guy. This is a podcast where we talk all about the art and science of financial modeling with distinguished financial modelers from around the globe. The Financial Modeler's Corner podcast is brought to you by the Financial Modeling Institute. FMI offers the most respected accreditations in financial modeling, and that is why I completed the Advanced Financial Modeler earlier this year. This week, I'm thrilled to be welcomed on the show by Charles Keepman. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you. So, first question for you. Tell me about that worst financial model. I know you have to have a horror story. Worst one you've seen or built or dealt with.
Oh, man. I can't remember, the exact one necessarily, but I just remember whenever things were unorganized, it was really hard to figure out what was going on. Tons of hard-coded cells, formulas not being, organized in a good fashion. And as soon as you open those up, you just know that it's might be more time fixing than building a new one.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. You open them up and you start trying to figure them out, and you're just like, okay, I could spend a week figuring this out, and I still may not like the way it's built, or I can just start over.
Exactly.
So what do you usually pick in that case? You typically starting over?
I would usually rather start over.
I agree with you.
Hard, especially when you're working, it's hard when you're working for a client, especially because they may be really proud of it and not understand why you don't like it or whatever it may be. But
yeah, I know a guy, he's like, yeah, they were pretty proud of this. And he said something like 50 workbook links, and one of them was 7 deep. So to get to the base file took 7 different workbooks that they had linked through. And I'm just like, no, that's not continuing. But he said, yeah, they weren't too happy with them as he rebuilt the whole thing, and because they were proud of that. I'm like, oh, no, that's a nightmare.
yeah, that's not ideal.
So what's been your main takeaway from those kind of horror stories, those models that just are terrible?
I think what I've learned the most is to follow best practices as much as possible, but also annotate when you deviate it from it. Because I feel like building a model is a lot like the English language in the sense that there's a lot of rules, but probably just as many contradictions to those rules. And so as long as I can annotate somehow, whether it's, highlighting, throwing a comment in, or just putting a note off into the margin, I feel like that's the best way. Because whenever you're building something, you always think, oh, I'm going to remember this. It's like when I set things down, I'm going to remember where I put this, but you never do. I never do, I should say.
I don't either. My wife's always having to find stuff for me.
Yeah. So from that perspective, I just try to annotate as much as possible in the moment to save myself time in the future.
And what would be your top maybe 2 or 3 rules, kind of your guiding principles with the model?
I think there needs to be organization. So, when I started off my career at Ernst Young and learned a ton from their modeling team, and it was kind of like, inputs, calculations, outputs. And if you just follow that organization, That's rule number one. Rule number two is make sure that all of your formulas are, you know, auditable. And I would rather, in the beginning of my career, I always thought it was the right thing to just make the formula as complex as possible and be efficient with the space in Excel. But now I'm the opposite. I would rather create tons of helper rows or helper cells to get me to the ultimate conclusion. That way somebody can just spend way less time auditing it, F2ing it and figuring out what's going on.
It's amazing how early in our career we think complex is cool. The longer you spend, you're like, just keep it simple. And the truth is, simple is often harder.
It is.
It's kind of funny, but that's why I say it all the time. I'm like, simple is hard, complex is easy. Don't believe me? Try figuring out how to do a lookup table in a formula versus some nasty nested if. The nested if is easier, but nobody wants to audit that or deal with it.
Exactly.
Tell our audience a little bit about your background, kind of where you started your career, what you're doing today. Give us that, 2-3 minute rundown.
Yeah. So I started Ernst Young in their financial modeling group. It was an awesome experience. I loved it. In fact, I probably would have stayed longer had not, a few things kind of happened in my personal life that made sense for us to move. But it was a great experience and I loved it. It was challenging from the perspective of I never felt like I was getting good at anything specific besides just learning more and more formulas and, complex, series of formulas, I should say. But it was a great experience. And then from there, I went to Economics Partners, which is now known as Ryan Valuation. And so I'm mainly doing business valuations at this point. There's still a good amount of modeling from the perspective of we're building, valuation models, but it's a lot more templatized as opposed to custom built from scratch or, reviewing really complex big deal models like, some of the things I used to do in the past.
Makes sense. That's helpful. So you've pretty much spent your whole career modeling from what I can tell, right? Is that pretty fair statement?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I wouldn't say that, the modeling is not complex in what I'm dealing with now, but yeah, I spent every day in Excel for the last who knows how long.
Yeah. So did you always know you wanted to be involved in financial modeling and kind of what you're doing? Or when did you know, hey, this is where I want to be? This is what I like doing?
That's a great question. I think growing up, I always thought I would be in finance, given that my dad was in finance and I learned a lot from him. I would intern for him over the summers when I had availability and he was willing to take me in college and high school and things like that. But then when I went to college, I always thought I would go out and kind of prove myself and then come back and work for him. But I realized that I really liked a lot more of kind of the financial modeling side rather than just, the lending side, which I still really enjoy that side, but he was more on the lending side. And so at EY, I really enjoyed working with all these different companies, and then Economic Partners and Ryan Valuation, which is the name of the company today. I've really enjoyed just learning about all these different types of businesses and modeling out kind of, whether it's explicitly or kind of mentally in order to select the proper, comparable companies. But I've really enjoyed figuring out how all these different companies work. And I think that's why, I joined this company thinking I'd be here for a couple of years. And that's why I've been here for almost 7 now, is because I've just really enjoyed it.
And, if you find somewhere you enjoy, why move? If you're happy, it meets your family's needs, they pay you appropriately, and you feel challenged, you don't got to move. That's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I feel really lucky from that perspective.
no, that's great. It's always nice when you find what you love to do. So I'm curious, what's your favorite part of modeling? Is it that process of understanding different companies, putting the model together in Excel, or what is it that you really enjoy about it?
I think the most enjoyable part is not necessarily what I do on a day-to-day basis, but it's laying out templates to create efficiencies. And it's making things that are complex really easy to understand. I mean, even in my personal life, there's a lot of times where I need to build things out just to be able to make a decision, whether it's, buying a house or making an investment or whatever it may be. And I think the most enjoyable part is building something that's dynamic, Because, growing up, you had the calculator, right? And it was great. It's a great tool. There's one on your phone now, right? So you've got one constantly in your pocket, but it's not dynamic. And I think that's what really drew me towards models, is the fact that you can make it dynamic, such that you're in a conversation and you're, trying to decide, or somebody's trying to decide whether or not to invest in something. And they say, well, what if this happened? And the best part is that you've already theoretically figured out that potential question ahead of time. And you say, oh yeah, well, if the discount rate on your discounted cash flow model goes from, you know, 20% down to 15%, here's how it affects the ultimate value. And just that ability to be dynamic is, I think, the magic to me of modeling.
That ability to kind of do those sensitivities, the scenarios, make those adjustments and see what will happen. It's like when you create a table and you can be like, all right, if we can get EBITDA up by two more points, or it makes this much difference in value, or whatever it may be, or hey, if my loan's this rate, I ain't ever paying this thing off, or whatever the answer is.
Yeah, which we actually do without a law, right? I mean, in our business, we do a lot of compliance-based valuations for financial reporting and also for tax purposes, like trust and
Sure.
estate or whatever it may be, related matters. But there's a subset of our practice where we're just doing purely strategic, helping people kind of review alternatives of, well, what should I do with this business? Maybe they inherited it from their parents, or maybe they started it a long time ago and they've just been running it and it's always paid the bills, but they're trying to figure out, well, am I being a good steward of this business that either was given to me or I've created? And it's really fun to be able to, in those circumstances, show them the sensitivities, right? Like, hey,
Yeah.
if you can prove that your company should be in the higher end of the range of an EBITDA multiple, and here's how, maybe you could do that from a qualitative perspective. Here's what that means quantitatively.
If you can get a 12 multiple instead of a 9, that means, 600,000 or whatever the number is, 3 million, and it's like, oh wow, it makes a big difference, because the qualitative is what helps determine where you get in that range.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, in the beginning of my career, I think doing what I was doing, there was a lot more quantitative stuff, right? We were dealing with large data sets. We were in Excel. Sometimes we're beyond Excel and Access or Power BI because there's just too much data. But it was all kind of quantitative. And now the quantitative stuff in evaluation is really not that difficult. It's a multiple of EBITDA, multiple of revenue. Discounted cash flow can get a little bit more complex, but at the end of the day, it's really just a present value formula. And so there's a lot more, cultural aspects and qualitative aspects that really have huge differentiating, effects on the ultimate conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if all you're doing for evaluation, I'm careful to use the word all you're doing. I mean, I know it's work, but if you're just using comparables, that's not near as complex as this big M&A that has a bunch of debt with it, and trying to combine two companies and have all these people doing due diligence and all kinds of adjustments, right? That's a whole different level than saying, okay, based on the quality, based on everything you've given me, a few adjustments, here's where we're looking at. And it's really more that discussion around what does that mean and what's the difference between these numbers? How do you think about it versus trying to get that big, huge model to turn out what people want, and then having the discussions around, well, we expected it to be valued around this. Can we make these adjustments? We can. Doesn't mean they're realistic. And then we've all been there where there's times very much realistic, but there are times you're like, I don't know that you can ever achieve those. I mean, obviously, if you can achieve them, here's your value, but probably should challenge those assumptions a little more.
Granted, there are some times where it's like, hey, if this is the result you really want, then here are the inputs that will get you there, right? And sometimes that's important to know as well. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. Sometimes it's knowing, okay, well, what do I even have to do to potentially get there?
Yeah, and then charting out a path to actually get there. I had one, it's kind of funny, my boss told me I wasn't there at the time. The merger ended up happening later, but there were a couple companies that were being looked at. And I had a boss one time tell me, Yeah, basically that deal was sprinkled with, what do you put it, unicorns and rainbows. It never happened. And you can tell why, because that was his words. Like, that's how it was sprinkled. I'm like, okay, yeah, good thing it didn't happen if that was the case.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So I'm curious, you mentioned, kind of using Excel in your personal life. What's the funnest or your most unique thing you've used Excel for in your personal life? You built any unique models or kind of fun things that you've done?
I've bought like a couple of real estate properties, and so definitely using it from that perspective to benchmark against, okay, well, if I were to just put this money in the market, how would it do versus, what benefits would I get from investing in, a rental property? So it's that, and I guess the other thing that I was proud of recently is I had a line of credit, and there was a couple of different projects that were all on the line of credit at once, and I had to figure out what portion of the balance, what portion of the interest was attributable to each project when these projects were drawing down and paying off at different times. And so it's not necessarily that complex, but it's one of those things where, if all the projects were just completely me, would it really matter for me to, like, it probably wouldn't make sense from an efficiency perspective for me to spend the time building it out and figuring out what's going where. But when you have a variable interest rate and multiple partners, it's crucial that when you go through that process, you have to do it right in order to make sure that you're being fair to, all the other parties involved.
That makes sense. And as you were saying that, I kind of had to laugh. I'm like, I can tell I have a hardcore finance guy. Everything is kind of that finance and valuing it and home. And I had one guy tell me he built a bathroom tracker in Excel. Yeah, he was tracking a lot, like, so it would go to the bathroom or something. Another one was he built something to track. There was a show and he started noticing they swore a lot in it. So he built a tracker to count how many times it swore in the show. Yours are tame by comparison to some of the fun ones I've had.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I guess
Another
I'm
one
not.
built something to beat a game show, if I remember right.
Yeah, maybe I need to get a little bit more adventurous.
So you need to get a little more creative in your Excel. You can come back in 6 months and tell us some, crazy thing you built.
Well, life always tells me I need to focus more on my creativity. So this is the universe, continuing in that direction.
Yeah, just tell her she's right.
I mean, she is.
But yeah, I was gonna say, if you want to be happy, just tell her she's right. I'm gonna get myself in trouble if my wife listens to this episode. All right, moving on to the next question. So when you first start, to create a model valuing a company, where do you typically start? Kind of maybe talk a little bit about that process.
Most companies are going to have some sort of template model, right? They're going to have already built out kind of their efficiencies. But assuming you didn't have one of those, I mean, I think the first place you start is really taking a step back and thinking, okay, well, how will this company be valued? And really, there's three main ways theoretically that a company's valued. You look at their assets, you look at and mark them to market, like their balance sheet, and just mark it to market. You look at the comparable companies and figure out if some sort of multiple of revenue or EBITDA or, price to earnings or whatever it might be makes sense. And then you look at an income approach. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the true value of something is what its future cash flows are going to produce, right? And then discounted to today from the perspective that a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow. But the question is how much more, right? And that's where your discount rate and time value of money comes into play and people's preferences and all that kind of stuff. But I think that, the first place you start is just trying to figure out, well, what type of business is this? How does this business trade in the marketplace? And, where does it look like? If it's a really early stage business, well, it might not have any revenues yet. And so you're going to have to do some sort of cost or asset approach. And a lot of those assets probably aren't even on the balance sheet. If it's a, super stable company that has really consistent growth and margin characteristics, then, an income approach probably makes the most sense. If it's a company that, has some combination of, growth and margin that's not extremely set in stone, well, maybe you're looking more so at market approach and trying to figure out how they compare to other companies on a go forward basis.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, obviously, a lot depends on the company, the size, the stage, the industry, etc. For you personally, is there a favorite method you like to use? Like saying, all else equal, do you tend to like to do a DCF? Like if you were buying a company and any method could work, is there one you would prefer that you like to use that you think is kind of your favorite?
The nerd in me loves the discounted cash flow because
I
that's the
figured you
most
were going to say
robust, right? But kind of like the person inside of me that craves like the simplistic, like easy to understand, I love the market approach because it's like buying a car, right? You figure out what you want and then you go look for it and you compare it to all of the other cars and you adjust for color and mileage and features and all that kind of stuff. It's the exact same with the business, right? You're looking at an industry, you're trying to figure out how comparable it is and the best way to compare it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like when you buy a home, right? They do comparables. This many square feet, this many bedrooms, this big in the yard, this many bathrooms, has a pool, it doesn't have a pool. You just go through a list, a bunch of things and say, okay, based on location and everything else, it should run you X. You're going to pay roughly this amount. And then you look at all the ones that are way outside that and you go, what happened? Why am I paying this?
Totally.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite industry? Like, is there a particular industry you like to work in?
Reason why I've been here so long, I mean, I say so long, but the longer than I thought I would is because there's not an industry that I'm partial to necessarily, but the fact that I'm constantly seeing these unique businesses across multiple industries. I think that's what really is exciting to me is understanding how each industry and each kind of business model would command different types of desire by folks purchasing them.
What's kind of the maybe most unique business you've seen? Like one that like you were like, oh, wow, that's different. I would never thought of, that being a business. Have you seen one that maybe kind of jumps out to you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I feel like it's on a monthly basis where here in the office there's some wild company that, we're so surprised by. I think there was one that was trying to rent silverware on like a subscription basis. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I think the more interesting piece of this is not the crazy businesses we see. It's the ones that actually succeed and the ones that don't. It's not always what you would imagine. And I think that's where the real the real kind of interest occurs. It's like there's no way that can work. And then all of a sudden they IPO for some crazy price or like oh yeah, that'll totally work. And then they go under it. And I mean, yeah. Maybe there's a reason I'm not in venture.
I remember I did an entrepreneurship undergrad and we had this class where the teacher had us work with companies that had come to him putting together some valuation stuff. I can't remember what the document was called now. It tells you how old I am. Yeah, this is 25 years ago. And I remember we had one of them and I missed a meeting because it was the teacher and the other person could only meet at the time. We all thought it was a bad idea and we told them as much. They ended up raising the money they wanted. Last I knew, they were doing very well. I'm like, knows what I know, not a whole lot.
Exactly.
So you never know. I mean, I talk to a lot of startups around FP&A software, and the one thing I've learned is just how important the team is. So much of it is, great founder over great technology. Give me the great founder, great management team any day. Now, obviously, I want both, and I want it at a low price, but that's usually not reality, right?
Of course.
I'm curious, on average, how much time do you spend kind of working in Excel versus working on a deal?
What do you mean by in a deal or on a deal?
Well, like talking to people, working with the business, not working
Oh, I
in
see what you're
Excel
saying.
on the model, kind of, right? Because you have a lot of other stuff. There's telling the story, there may be talking to people, asking questions versus the actual model building or the fun time you get to spend in the spreadsheet.
I would say that the majority of time is really spent tweaking assumptions based off of the research associated with those assumptions. I think we're all kind of geeks over here. We all love Excel. We've spent a lot of time. I mean, if you summed up the hours, it's insane, perfecting as much as we can our template model such
Yep.
that it's as efficient as possible. And so it still takes a lot of time to build out just because there's all the financials and the capitalization table information and all that kind of stuff. And especially when you're building like complex waterfalls and option pricing models to determine the value of common stock when there's preferred stock involved, it does take a lot of time to make sure that, number one, that you get it in there, but mainly that you get it in there right and there's no errors in it. But the majority of the time, I think we spend mainly debating kind of on like the internal deal team, if you will, the assumptions and whether the multiple should be 6x or 7x or whatever it may be, because that's really where people are paying us for this, right? And I think that especially with AI and softwares coming out, like, you could probably do a lot of this with a software, but there's that human element, the art, if you will, associated with the science that the gut check, the ability to kind of put into each valuation what we've seen in all of the other valuations and what we've seen in company purchases and so forth, that is really hard to nail, I feel like, in some sort of software AI.
FP&A Guy here, and as you know, I am very passionate about financial modeling and the Financial Modeling Institute's mission. I have been a huge fan of the FMI for years, and I was super excited when they decided to sponsor the Financial Modelers Corner. I recently completed the Advanced Financial Modeler certification and loved the entire experience. It was top-notch from start to finish. I am a better modeler today for having completed the certification. I strongly believe every modeler needs to demonstrate they are a qualified financial modeler, and one of the best ways to do that is through the FMI's program. Earning the accreditation will demonstrate to your current and future employers that you are serious about financial modeling. What are you waiting for? Visit www.fminstitute.com/podcast and use code podcast to save 15% when you enroll in an accreditation today. Yeah, no, I hear you there. That's what a lot of people say. There's the human element and the judgment. And hey, does this pass a sniff test? Like we've all seen times when someone puts in an assumption and you're just like, no, sorry, it's not doable. Like, in 2022, 2021, if you assumed 1% inflation next year, everybody's going to look at you like, I don't know, we just came through 7%. One might be a little off, right? And so I'm with you. I think, and that sniff test is so important, that ability to look at something and be able to tell it's off and then have a conversation, because there is no right answer. It's why I love George Box has a quote. He was a scientist, modeler, physicist, and he said, all models are wrong, some are useful. I think that's really the goal is it useful? Can we support the assumptions, not are the assumptions right?
Well, and that's another debate that I think we often have internally at the firm. And I think just in general is, we could go in and do these complex Monte Carlo analyses and all this kind of stuff, which sometimes that is the best approach.
Sure.
But it's always the question of does the added complexity give you a better result? And sometimes the answer might be yes, but oftentimes, especially in my personal life, I think it's, generally I will err on the side of simplicity because, you can get analysis paralysis. You can look at things a million different ways and, it doesn't mean that you're going to get a better result or a better answer.
Yeah, be more complex sometimes will create a false sense of precision. Complexity doesn't mean precision. You could do back of the envelope, and if you know something really, really well, be quite precise. And there's other times where you need to do a full risk analysis or a really detailed sensitivity scenario, Monte Carlo, what list goes on and on and on, right? All kinds of different ways you could do that. And, what the right level is going to vary by project, your knowledge, the people you're working with. I mean, we always say err on the side of simplicity. I like to say keep it as simple as you can, because whoever you're working for will complicate it by the time you're done.
Yeah. There's an individual who, I'm lucky enough to have kind of as a mentor, Kevin Yiannopoulos, and he always talks about the illusion of precision with me and some of my colleagues, and how, sometimes, especially for like financial statement auditor related stuff, and it's not their fault necessarily. They just need something to be able to analyze and audit and stuff like that. And so if you come with a simplistic approach or a pragmatic approach, you might be just as right as the super complex models, but they just want to see more. And so he always, talks about, and I've really, appreciated his focus on, don't fall for the illusion of precision by overcomplicating things.
I have a tendency to overcomplicate, and I have to remind myself of that one. So I always appreciate that. So I know today you're a director in the role you have. So are you doing any auditing of models? Do you do much of that?
Yeah, I would say most of my time is revealing the models that we're creating internally for clients, and ultimately, we don't generally share our valuation models. It's the the analysis per se that we're coming up with. But yeah, most of my time is spent reviewing that. And our firm is not set up in the sense where we have pure business development folks and pure execution folks. We all kind of need to do both, right? We need to keep the lights on, but it's really hard, I've found, to be efficient and effective at getting new business when you can't really talk the talk. And if you're not doing this work on a consistent basis, it's even harder to stay sharp and be able to present well. So
I hear you. I don't get to build models near as much as I used to. And sometimes like it's trying to stay sharp. Certain things ask questions like, it's been a while since I've done that. I might be a little rusty.
yeah. Well, especially when technology is moving as quickly as it is, and Excel's coming out with new formulas and all that kind of stuff.
No, it's pretty amazing to watch how much Excel's changed over the last years. It has me excited. That's one area I follow closely since I do Excel training and things, but just amazing what you can do today versus 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. And I really appreciate how they're like trying to simplify things, right? They noticed that, for example, I'm sure this is, this, probably most people listening know this, but like the index match formula was something that was just kind of created by blending two formulas together. And then they were like, well, let's just make it X lookup. That way people can actually understand how it works without having to Google it or look at somebody else's, examples.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, XLOOKUP, they said, let's take the best of VLOOKUP and index match and try to create something. And in 90% of situations, I think it's easier to understand. I can see why people do index match. It's whatever you're familiar with. And there are cases, there's some things you can't do with XLOOKUP, but in general, I love when I have to train people. I wish I didn't know VLOOKUP at all because XLOOKUP just is easier to train. It makes sense. Like I taught 2 18-year-old girls. They're getting ready to college. Their dad paid me to teach them Excel. And they're like, why would I ever use VLOOKUP? Why do I even need to know this? I'm like, trust me, plenty of people will use it during your career. You want to at least know it. But they're giving me this look like, why are you even teaching me this? And I explained it. Oh, that makes sense. So it's kind of funny. What's your favorite Excel shortcut? Everyone has one.
Shortcut. I think it's the ability to like the Alt ES. So
Yes, I
Alt
love
ES,
that.
either like V or F or whatever. Because when you're modeling, sometimes you want the format 'cause you want it to look pretty, and sometimes you want the formula, and sometimes you just want the value. And so
Yeah.
just having that like quick functionality to do that is really nice.
There's even times when for me it's Alt ESV with a add or subtract, a D or an S or whatever. You just have some numbers you need to subtract into something, and hopefully not in a model I'm doing that or someone's gonna hate me. But
Yeah, exactly.
you know what I mean? When you're just doing something quick and dirty, sometimes you're like, okay, I just got to get these numbers roughly where I need them to be.
But I
So
think the most helpful is that like when I'm dealing with large data sets, it's Alt AM, so to like sort and filter the unique ones.
yeah, I use the unique formula all the time to create unique lists of something. Makes sense. Yeah. Alt AM as well. Yeah. Remove those duplicates. Definitely use that one more than once. All right. So what's the number one lesson you've learned during your career that's helped you the most?
Ironically, I think it's a lot of what we've already talked about. It's the importance of creating something that's like simplistically built and auditable, right? People like it's great if you create something crazy complex for yourself, but it's a bigger measure of somebody's intellect if they can take something really complex and chop it into little parts to make it work. There's so many times where we'll have a really complex, formula or, data set that we're trying to figure something out on. And I learned this from, a guy that I worked with at EY that was also a mentor to me. And what we were trying to figure out, or what he would always do, is he would say, build a really simple example and just see if the formula works. And then slowly add in like additional complex layers and see if you can edit your formula such that it's going to work on the big one. Because if you can make sure that that formula is working on a subset that's small, that's that's understandable, and you can know what the answer you're trying to look for is, then you can transfer that kind of like formulaic process to the bigger, more complex model. And obviously you're still going to run your tests and your checks and things like that. But it's a lot easier to start small and like increase the complexity rather than just build something all at once from scratch in one cell for something you're trying to figure out.
Totally agree. It's a lot easier to troubleshoot and test when you start with a small data set. I mean, I did a lot of SQL coding. Sometimes
wow.
I'd start with something really small and go, okay, did I get all the right answers or all the steps right? And then you'd start adding more and more complexity, much like a formula. I did report writing for about a year and a half as one of my jobs. And
Oh, cool.
yeah, so very similar to Excel, where you're just like, okay, let me start simple and build. Because if you start complex, sometimes you don't even know if it's right. I think it's right.
Exactly.
First one looks right. We'll just drag it down and hope they're all right. Not that we'd ever do that, but all right. So we're going to move to rapid fire. I have about, I think there's 12, 14 questions here. The way this works, you can't use the answer of it depends. You pick a side. We'll run through all of them. Then at the end, if there's one or two you're passionate about, because all of these could be it depends, you can elaborate on a couple of them. So you ready? Right. Circular or no circular references in models?
Oh, gosh. No, if I can avoid it.
VBA or no VBA?
No, if I can avoid it.
Horizontal or vertical?
Vertical.
Dynamic arrays in models, yes or no?
No.
External workbook links, yes or no?
No.
I knew where that one was going to go. Named ranges, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Do you follow a formal standards board like FAST or one of the others, SMART, some of those that are out there?
Not to my knowledge. I may inadvertently base off of my training.
Sure, there may be some of it you're following. Makes sense. Should financial modelers learn Python and Excel?
I could see a lot of benefits. Yeah.
So is that a yes or no?
But no, I'm a purist.
Okay. I get it. What about Power Query?
Yes.
What about Power BI?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Will Excel ever die?
No way.
Will AI build the models for us in the future?
I'm not going to be so pompous as to say no, because I honestly think that there's a way to do it.
There we go. Sheet cell protection in your model, yes or no?
Sure.
Yeah, I get it. All right. So which financial statement, in your view, is most important for financial modelers? Balance sheet, P&L, or cash flow?
Cash flow.
All right. Do you believe financial models are the number one corporate decision-making tool?
Ooh, I hope not. No,
What is?
I think it's all of the context.
Go with that. What is your lookup function of choice? Do you like choose, VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, index match, something else?
I used to be index match. I use XLOOKUP more often just to make sure that people reviewing can understand it. But I will agree that I think there are some unique things you can do with index match and match that are pretty awesome.
Yeah. And XMatch allows you to do even more now.
Oh, I haven't tried that one.
Yeah, because XMatch will have a smaller or larger, the same as XLOOKUP.
Oh.
And Wildcard has those same 4 options. So you can do index XMatch.
Wow, I'm going to have to check that out.
So
I
check
haven't
that
been
out.
dealing with as large data sets as I used to, so I haven't needed it as much, but
Yeah, and I like, if I need to do a nested, I'll do a nested XLOOKUP. If you've ever done that, to do it like an index match. You can nest your XLOOKUP.
oh, that's
So in
awesome.
your return array, you do your second XLOOKUP, and your first lookup value is the second value you're going to look up And your second array is the entire inside, like the match. And it will do a two-way. So you can do X lookup, and return both the rows and the columns.
Oh, that's great.
So
Yeah,
there's
that's
a
cool.
fun one for you. I did a YouTube video about it. I think I picked it up from Oz is where I learned that. He's an Excel MVP. I took his dynamic arrays course. So I knew early on, because I took it right as they came out, that you could do that. And so I've always done it that way. And most people are like, wait, you can do that? So there's a fun one for you. All right.
Yeah, I think that's the reality. The biggest takeaway I have with Excel is there's just so many things you can do. Like, I love Power BI, and I think that there's tons of opportunities there, especially because I used to deal with Axis, which Power BI I think is a
I'm
much
here. I get it.
it's a much better approach, and you've got all the kind of sexy things that you can bolt on top to review and things like that and slicers. But Excel's just such a blank canvas that you can do anything with. So it's hard to
That's the beauty of the spreadsheet interface. And Excel is the dominant one out there, whether it's Google Sheets, Excel, whether you use something else. It's just great to start with something blank and be able to build just about anything you want. It really is. Even, that's why I say it's kind of the art and science, right? There's a ton of art you can do in Excel, but if you don't follow the basic kind of science, those basic principles, you end up with one ugly painting, so to speak, that everybody wants to get rid of. Nobody wants when it's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, it's a lot of fun. All right. So we're coming up on the end of this, but is there one or two of those answers you wanted to elaborate on? One that you were kind of passionate about?
Do you feel like Power Query's still being used with Power BI now? I feel like Power BI has kind of taken over a lot of that functionality. That could have been just how I was using it in the past.
I think it depends on what you're doing. I definitely still think there's a lot of places for Power Query, but yes, there are a lot of people that are using Power Query and Power BI, or it all depends on how structured your data sources is and what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you're building data models and trying to visualize stuff and you have Power BI in your company and multiple people are going to use it, then why would you continue to do Power Query and Power Pivot? But like, let's say maybe you're just trying to do things ad hoc, you use a different BI tool in your company, or you're just trying to bring some data sources together. I still see Power Query a lot of times getting used. So I think it depends on the use case and what you're trying to accomplish, in my view. But I definitely believe there's still a lot of room for Power Query.
And how have you seen AI already been utilized?
From what I've seen, the biggest areas we're seeing AI used, one, helping with Excel formulas is one of the most common out there from a study I saw. Not surprising. When I had to write a nasty indirect the other day, I'm like, I don't want to remember all the little single and double quotes. And so I just threw it all into ChatGPT. And in about 20 minutes, I had this big old long indirect. And I was like, it all works. Instead of spending 45 minutes going, okay, where's that stupid bracket? You know what I'm talking about. And so I think that's one area. I think the other area, great at summarizing data, transcribing, helping write emails, being creative for you. Where I still think we have a ways to go, and this is generative AI. I think when it comes to modeling, machine learning is still the dominant. Using statistical modeling, Profit, ARIMA, whatever, Monte Carlo, all those different things to help with that. Generative AI is good. Hey, give it some data, tell it what graph you want, do some basic analysis, do benchmarking against different companies, rip apart that 10K or 10Q and have it summarize it for you. A lot of those areas, definitely with coding and having Python, you're seeing some people use that, but I think most people are not yet. And the other challenge is very few people have it built into their workflows. So you still have some security concerns. You still have some, well, it's not in my workflow. Is it really going to save me that much time? I think we're getting there. So that's kind of what I'm seeing is I think people are still struggling to figure out all how to use it. But I think just about everybody's at least experimenting with it. Then the other issue, especially smaller and mid-sized companies, bigger companies often have the money to have this in a better place, but is your data good enough to actually use with AI? Because garbage in, garbage out. AI isn't going to make your data good. What are you seeing? What's your thoughts?
I think that it's going to have a profound effect. I just think it's like the security concerns are huge. And I think that the art of the AI will be humans figuring out the best way to utilize it, right? So you could say,
Sure.
hey, do all this analysis and give me this answer. But if that answer isn't auditable, if it's not adjustable, if it's not, understandable how it arrived at that conclusion, it's no good. And so I think, as humans craft how to use it and say, okay, here's what I want to understand, but I want you to break it out by, this,
Yep, and
this,
I've
and
done
this.
that with it. Tell me the logic you use. What are the assumptions? Versus just give me a number. Like, I have no idea.
Exactly. So I think it's going to be really cool once, it's more integrated. And I think it's, everybody trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way to use it? What's the safest way to use it? And all that kind of stuff. It's going to be interesting.
I agree. I think we can all use it today, and there's ways it can make us all more effective. But over time, as we really start figuring out the agent workflow and get it built into more and more tools, feel comfortable on the security side, have a little more transparency, it's going to become even more useful than it is today. I think quite a bit. It's exciting.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So last question for you. If you could offer one piece of advice to our audience to be a better financial modeler, what would be your one piece of advice?
I mean, probably your audience is better at modeling than I am, but I would say that just keep it simple. Make it easy to understand. If your grandma can understand what's going on, then I think you've done it right.
Say, if my dad can understand it, you're doing even better. He's not the modeling type. I like that. Grandma, dad. Yeah. Try that person that knows nothing about modeling, any idea. And if you can explain it to him, you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
All right. If our audience wants to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, just shoot me an email, charles.keepman@ryan.com. I'd love to learn more about you.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Charles, and thank you for carving out some time today. Enjoyed chatting with you.
Yeah, likewise.
Financial Modelers Corner was brought to you by the Financial Modeling Institute. This year, I completed the Advanced Financial Modeler certification, and it made me a better financial modeler. What are you waiting for? Visit FMI at www.fminstitute.com/podcast and use code podcast to save 15% when you enroll in one of the accreditations today.